It was a quiet Friday night when Sarah finally decided to stay in instead of going out with her friends. The autumn air outside was crisp, and the neighborhood seemed unusually still. She curled up on her couch with a blanket, a mug of tea, and the latest crime documentary streaming softly in the background. Her phone buzzed a few times with messages from her friends teasing her about missing out, but Sarah shrugged them off, enjoying the silence of her small suburban house. Around midnight, she turned the TV off, washed her mug, and double-checked the locks on the doors and windows, an old habit she had since moving in alone. Everything seemed normal, until she noticed the faintest movement in her backyard through the sliding glass door. It was so quick she thought maybe it was just the wind rustling the trees. But when she looked again, she could swear she saw the faint outline of someone standing near the fence. Her chest tightened. She turned off the kitchen light so the reflection wouldn't block her view, pressing her face closer to the glass. Nothing. Just darkness, the faint glow of the streetlight filtering between the trees. Convincing herself she was being paranoid after watching crime shows, Sarah laughed nervously and headed upstairs. Lying in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the old house seemed louder that night. At 2 a.m., she was woken up by a strange sound, soft, deliberate tapping. Her heart pounded as she sat up, straining to listen. The sound came again, this time clearer, like fingernails against glass. It was coming from downstairs. Sarah froze. She wanted to believe maybe it was branches against a window, but the sound had rhythm, too precise to be nature. Mustering up courage, she grabbed her phone and crept to the top of the stairs. Her stomach dropped when she saw a shadow moving across her living room floor, illuminated by the faint light from the street. She knew for certain now, someone was inside. Her hands shook as she dialed 911, whispering frantically to the operator that someone had broken in. The dispatcher told her to stay quiet and stay on the line. Sarah locked herself in her bedroom and shoved her dresser against the door as quietly as possible. Every second felt like hours. She could hear footsteps moving slowly through the house, the creak of floorboards growing closer. The intruder wasn't rushing. He was searching. She covered her mouth with her hand to muffle her breathing, tears streaming down her cheeks. When the footsteps reached the top of the stairs, she thought her heart might stop. She prayed the sirens would arrive before he tried her door handle. A minute later, the sound of heavy boots thudding across her front porch cut through the silence. Red and blue lights flashed through her curtains. The intruder's footsteps halted, then she heard a sudden crash, like a window breaking, and the noise of someone bolting out the back. Police shouted commands as they spread through her yard and house. Sarah stayed locked in her room until an officer gently knocked and identified himself. When she finally opened the door, she collapsed into their arms, shaking uncontrollably. The man had been inside her home for almost 20 minutes before the cops arrived. He had slipped in through the sliding glass door, despite her memory of locking it, and left behind muddy boot prints across her living room floor. The scariest part was that he hadn't taken anything. Nothing was stolen. He'd just been there, lurking, moving closer to her room until the police showed up. The police stayed until dawn, searching the property for any sign of the intruder. They combed the yard, checked the fence line, and even sent a K-9 into the woods behind Sarah's house. But by the time the sun rose, they had little more than muddy boot prints and a broken window to work with. Sarah sat on her couch wrapped in a blanket, sipping water from a bottle one of the officers had handed her. Her nerves were shredded. The officer in charge, a tall man with graying hair named Detective Harris, crouched beside her and assured her they'd patrol the neighborhood more often in the coming weeks. He told her she wasn't the first break-in they'd had recently, though most ended with stolen electronics or valuables. Her case disturbed him, he admitted, because whoever entered her house hadn't touched a single item. He seemed more interested in her. The thought made Sarah's blood run cold. She hadn't even considered that possibility, she had assumed the man fled before grabbing anything. But the way Harris looked at her, serious and concerned, made her realize this wasn't just a random burglary. The detective advised her to stay somewhere else for a while, maybe with family or friends, but Sarah shook her head. She didn't want to feel like she was being forced out of her own home. Harris pressed his lips into a thin line and said they'd increase patrols, but she should invest in better locks, security cameras, and maybe even motion lights. He gave her his card before leaving, the weight of his warning lingering long after the cruisers rolled away. That day, Sarah barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined the shadow of the man creeping up her stairs. She walked the house with her phone camera recording, showing friends the boot prints still faintly visible on her wooden floor. They urged her to come stay with them, but Sarah, stubborn and maybe too proud, refused. She did, however, go to the hardware store and spend hundreds on new locks, a heavy wooden dowel for the sliding door, and 2 motion sensor floodlights. She even ordered a set of security cameras online. By the time night fell, she felt somewhat reassured. She double-checked every door and window again, set the dowel bar firmly in place, and turned on her floodlights. Around midnight, when the quiet suburban street grew dark and still, Sarah climbed into bed with her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She left a lamp on, not caring how childish it made her feel. For the first couple of hours, everything was calm. The floodlights outside would flick on occasionally, triggered by a stray raccoon or gust of wind. Each time, Sarah's pulse would quicken, but she told herself it was working, the lights would scare off anyone lurking. Finally, near 3 a.m., exhaustion began to weigh her eyelids down. She drifted into a shallow sleep. The sound that woke her was different this time. Not tapping, not footsteps, but a faint mechanical click. She sat up in bed, her ears straining. Then came another sound, the faint hum of her floodlight buzzing to life. Her chest tightened. She grabbed her phone and pulled up the live feed from the temporary doorbell camera she had quickly installed earlier that day. The video loaded slowly, the grainy black and white image flickering onto her screen. Her breath caught in her throat. Standing just at the edge of the driveway, half hidden in the shadow of a tree, was a man. He wasn't moving, just standing perfectly still, facing her house. Sarah's hands shook so violently she almost dropped her phone. She whispered into the microphone, thinking maybe he could hear her through the doorbell speaker. "I've called the police," she lied, her voice trembling. The figure didn't flinch. Didn't move. It just stayed there, staring. She scrambled to dial 911 again, her heart pounding so hard she thought she might faint. While the operator answered, the floodlight clicked off. When it flicked back on seconds later, the man was gone. The dispatcher kept her calm until officers arrived. By the time the patrol car pulled up outside, the man was nowhere to be found. They searched the yard again, checked the woods, and even drove around the block, but it was as though he had vanished into thin air. This time, though, the officer found something chilling. On Sarah's back porch, resting neatly against the sliding door she had barricaded, was a folded piece of paper. In shaky handwriting, it read, "I just wanted to see you up close." Sarah sat frozen on her couch, staring at the note the officer had bagged as evidence. The words repeated in her mind like a broken record, "I just wanted to see you up close." It was one thing to think a burglar had been after her belongings. It was another entirely to realize that a stranger had been studying her, getting close enough to leave her a message on her back porch. The officers tried to reassure her, saying they'd run the handwriting through databases, maybe lift prints, but their voices blurred into background noise. Sarah felt as if her house had been stripped of safety. Even with the locks, the lights, and the cameras, she realized the man had still found a way to make her feel exposed. Detective Harris returned the next morning, looking more concerned than before. He sat across from her at the kitchen table, the note sealed in a plastic evidence bag between them. "This isn't typical," he admitted. "Most intruders don't want attention. They don't want to scare their victims. They want to get in, grab what they can, and leave. Whoever this guy is, he's breaking patterns. That's dangerous." Sarah asked him the question she'd been dreading, did he think the man would come back? Harris didn't sugarcoat it. Yes, he said flatly. He's fixated. Which means we have to get ahead of him. The detective recommended she stay with someone else again, but Sarah refused. She didn't want to live in fear, and a part of her felt that running would only encourage him. Harris promised to request extra patrols, and he arranged for her to borrow a portable panic alarm system that linked directly to dispatch. Still, when he left, the house felt hollow and vulnerable. Sarah tried to go about her day, working remotely from her laptop, but her eyes kept darting to the sliding door, half expecting another note to appear. By nightfall, her nerves were frayed. She set up the new cameras she'd ordered, pointing one at the backyard, another at the front door, and one in the hallway near her stairs. She kept the panic alarm clipped to her pajamas like a lifeline. She thought about calling a friend, but she didn't want to sound like she was losing her mind. Instead, she tried to distract herself with a movie, but every flicker of light outside, every rustle of leaves against the house, made her jump. Around 2 in the morning, she woke with a start. This time, it wasn't a sound that stirred her, but the buzz of her phone. Her security camera app had triggered an alert, motion detected, backyard. Sarah's stomach dropped as she swiped open the feed. At first, she saw only shadows, the faint swaying of branches in the wind. Then, the figure appeared, walking calmly across her yard, heading toward the back door. He moved slowly, deliberately, almost as if he wanted to be seen. Her breath caught in her throat. He stopped in front of the sliding door and tilted his head, peering into the house. She could see the faint glint of his eyes reflecting the light, locked directly on the camera. Sarah scrambled for the panic alarm and pressed it, the shrill sound echoing through the house while it transmitted the alert to dispatch. The man didn't flinch. He just stood there, staring, the alarm wailing between them. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he raised his hand. For a moment, Sarah thought he was going to smash the glass. Instead, he pressed his palm against it, slowly dragging it downward, leaving a smeared print. Then he stepped back, turned, and disappeared into the woods again. The police arrived minutes later, sweeping the property once more, but as before, the man was gone. They found no new notes, no footprints this time. Just the faint smudge of his handprint across the glass. Harris arrived soon after, looking grim. He's escalating, he told her. First, he comes inside. Then, he leaves you a message. Now, he's taunting you directly. He's not just intruding, Sarah. He's stalking you. Her hands trembled as she asked the question that had been clawing at her all night, why me? Harris hesitated before answering. That's what we need to find out. Do you recognize him? Ex-boyfriend, old co-worker, anyone? Sarah shook her head fiercely. She didn't know anyone like this. No one in her life fit this shadow. The detective leaned forward. Then this is worse. Because it means he picked you at random. And random makes him unpredictable. Sarah barely slept that night, the image of his eyes glowing in the camera feed burned into her mind. For the first time, she wondered if her house was cursed, if staying there was a mistake. But one thing gnawed at her most of all, the feeling that the man wasn't just watching her. He was waiting. By the next evening, Sarah was a shell of herself. Her nerves were so frayed that every small sound made her jump. She left every light in the house blazing, blinds drawn tight, cameras running, alarms clipped to her clothing like armor. Still, the silence felt oppressive, pressing in around her. She couldn't escape the memory of the man's eyes staring through the camera, his palm smearing down her glass door. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was the dreadful certainty that he was planning something worse. Detective Harris returned in the afternoon, checking in on her before his shift. He studied the footage again, shaking his head. This isn't a thrill break-in anymore, he said. He's focused entirely on you. He's feeding off your fear. Sarah tried to hold back tears as she asked what she could do. Harris's advice was blunt: you need to leave. At least until we catch him. The more you stay here, the more opportunities you're giving him. But Sarah dug her heels in. This was her home. She couldn't abandon it, not to some stranger who had decided to terrorize her. Harris sighed, leaving her with his direct line and a promise to have units cruise by through the night. As the sun dipped below the horizon, dread pooled in her stomach. She cooked herself dinner but could hardly eat. Each creak of the house echoed like footsteps. She checked her cameras obsessively, refreshing the feed every 5 minutes, desperate for reassurance. At 10 p.m., she caught herself whispering aloud, "He won't come tonight, he won't come tonight." But deep down, she didn't believe it. At 1 a.m., the floodlights triggered. Sarah's heart lurched into her throat as she fumbled for her phone. The camera feed lit up, showing movement at the edge of her yard. It was him, again. This time, though, he wasn't wearing dark clothes. He had changed into something light, almost gray, which made him stand out against the shadows. He walked slowly, deliberately, straight across her yard, his head tilted upward toward her bedroom window. Sarah's stomach knotted. He wasn't even trying to sneak anymore. He wanted her to know he was there. Sarah pressed the panic alarm, her hands trembling so badly she could barely hold it. The shrill sound pierced the night, echoing through her neighborhood. Still, the man didn't run. He stopped in the center of her yard and stood perfectly still, staring up at her window as if daring her to look back. Her throat tightened as she realized he knew exactly where she was. She ducked down below the window, clutching her phone as she called 911. The operator's calm voice grounded her slightly, but her eyes darted back to the screen. He was still there, rooted like a statue. Then, to her horror, he slowly raised his arms out to his sides, as though displaying himself. It was a strange, ritualistic gesture that made her skin crawl. Finally, when the sound of approaching sirens echoed faintly in the distance, he lowered his arms, turned, and strolled casually back into the woods. When the police arrived, Sarah was nearly hysterical. She kept repeating, "He doesn't run, he doesn't run," as Harris and 2 officers searched the area. They found nothing, no footprints, no broken branches in the woods, not even a trace. It was as though he evaporated once the sirens came close. Harris looked more unsettled than Sarah had ever seen him. "He's bold," he muttered. "Too bold. He knows we're coming, but he doesn't care. He wants you to see him." Sarah begged them to stay longer, and one officer agreed to park outside her house for the rest of the night. Though it gave her some relief, she couldn't shake the dread that the man would return anyway, finding some new way to torment her. She hardly slept, instead watching her cameras with wide, bloodshot eyes. By morning, she thought she'd survived another close call. But when she opened her front door to grab the newspaper, her breath caught in her throat. Lying neatly on the welcome mat was a single Polaroid photo. Her hand shook violently as she bent to pick it up. The picture was grainy, but there was no mistaking what it showed, her. She was asleep in her bed, the lamp still glowing faintly beside her, her face peaceful and unaware. The photo had been taken inside her house. Sarah screamed so loudly that her neighbor came running. She dropped the photo onto the porch, her entire body trembling uncontrollably. Harris was called immediately, rushing to the scene. When he saw the Polaroid, his jaw clenched and his face darkened. "This changes everything," he said. "He's not just watching anymore. He's been in your room while you were sleeping." Sarah couldn't stop shaking as she stared at the Polaroid sealed in the evidence bag. Seeing herself asleep, utterly vulnerable, made her skin crawl. The idea that he had been inside her bedroom while she lay unaware was worse than anything she had imagined. The police searched the house again, every closet, every crawl space, even the attic, but there was no sign of forced entry. No windows were broken, no locks were tampered with. Somehow, he had gotten in and out without leaving a trace. Detective Harris paced her living room, visibly rattled. "This is beyond a stalker now," he said. "This is a predator who's escalating rapidly. And he's careful. He knows how to move without leaving evidence. That means he's done this before." Sarah pressed a trembling hand to her forehead, fighting nausea. "You're telling me I had a stranger in my room, standing over me while I slept. And you still can't catch him?" Harris didn't respond immediately, but the silence was answer enough. That night, Sarah refused to sleep upstairs. She dragged blankets and a pillow into the living room, positioning herself near the front door where the officer parked outside could at least hear her if she screamed. She left all the lights on, her cameras streaming on her phone in front of her. Still, her body trembled with exhaustion and fear. At some point past 3 in the morning, she dozed off, her phone buzzing against her chest. The notification Joel.